Also, just for our Wild Ones updates, March 26th is our third annual symposium. It will be at Frick Environmental Center again. And on June 22nd, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. will be our native plant sale. Again, we will be hosting that at Allegheny River Park Trail. So check us out on Facebook, check out the website. We are updated and we have a lot of other wonderful fall or winter now, actually, presentations for you guys in January and February. And I'm going to hand it off to Jim, and I'm so excited to hear about our wonderful night flying butterflies. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Tamara. I appreciate the introduction. And Liz, thanks for running everything so smoothly. And I am going to trust everyone can hear me quite well. And I'll operate on that assumption since I cannot make eye contact with you. This is a talk about moths for sure, loosely based on the book that you see, that's the cover on the left. But the book has a lot more specifics than I'm going to go into. I'm just going to try and make the case basically as to why moths are important and that they are important at all. We will see. This is what the book covers. The area in orange, it's parts of, I think it's 9 states or some of them, the entire state. And it's a region based on botany, plants. It's an innovative region. We just did it for purposes of moths mostly, but the plant life, native plant life is remarkably similar in that area. Once you get out of the orange area, the plants really start to shift dramatically. And so do our moths, as we will see. They're very, very tied to specific natives. So this is a quote from the front of the book. The bottom line is all butterflies are moths. There's no such thing as butterflies. And that's really true. That is Akito Kawahara. He's at the University of Florida, which has some of the leading entomologists in North America down there. But I agree with him, and we'll kind of see about that as we go along. So this is a native plant talk too, by extension, because you cannot talk about moss without talking about native plants, but we've been hard on those. Just to take my state as an example, there's about 1,800 natives that occur here. We're a pretty diverse state, and over 1/3 of those species are officially listed as some category of imperilment by the ODNR, the Department of Natural Resources. These statistics would be probably very similar in all of the Midwestern states, in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. We just have laid waste to a lot of habitat, and even a lot of our common plants are, if you want to call them that, are not nearly as common. And that affects moths, of course, because native plants grow moths, non-natives don't. The chemical connectivity between both species is really something. It's a talk in its own right, but basically plants, native plants and moths have adapted a coevolution of their chemistry, basically. And the moths can assimilate the compounds in these native floras that they've co-evolved with, and they generally cannot if it's not native. They're incredibly important. We'll see a lot about caterpillars, and that's a big reason why, but they are such a food source that we would undoubtedly lose a lot of our songbirds, especially if moths just vanished overnight, and other animals too that are dependent upon them. So this is what we've done, and we've done it very well as people. One of the ways we wipe out moth habitat is just flat out development, like this suburb here. I would note too that many of these suburbs, increasingly it seems, are named epitaphically. They're named for the resources they destroyed, like Whispering Oaks in that picture. This, and not as much in your state, but as you move west, this is the huge culprit, and the gorilla in the room, if you will, is just flat agriculture. This is a prairie, former prairie, in north central Ohio. Used to cover probably, I don't know, 12,000 square miles. And this is what it's become, America's breadbasket. All of the native prairie flora, of which was incredibly diverse, wiped out and converted to mostly 3 crops, corn, beans, and wheat. and that's on an epic scale. And then you have, the worst case scenario possibly if you're a moth would be that. That's my fair city, Columbus, Ohio, and one, all the native plants are gone. Most of the plants in general are gone. And then you have this problem of light pollution that really affects moths, that they are drawn to lights for reasons that are imperfectly understood, and it's too long to even get into, but we all know that. They come to your night lights. A lot of times they'll probably never get back into the breeding pool. But we can do a lot. This is my front yard in Worthington, which is a suburb on the north side of Columbus. And that's a year it was heavy on the coneflowers, purple coneflowers especially, but it varies. But the big theme here is that there are a lot of native plants in my yard, and I'm not the only one. Your movement's grown a lot. But it's still too rare. None of my neighbors are like this, so I serve as an oasis. This is the front yard. You should see the backyard. It's all fenced in. They can't see in there. And there are more things. But in the front yard, I am respectful of neighbors. Just for what it's worth, I like neat edges around my wild gardens, and I put a little sign. It's from the Midwest Native Plant Society here in Ohio, but it's down out of the picture in the front, but it says native plants, and then a little bit of text about it. And those two things, I've never had anyone complain about this. So why care about moths? We talked about the linkage with native flora, but I'll just go to the fourth point. I'm glad I don't have to read these because they're right in front of you on your computer screen, theoretically, so I won't read them. But anyway, the fourth one is important to this talk. I just really want to make a case for how cool these bugs are. But other than that, the one above it, critical parts of food webs, you just cannot underemphasize that. So a little Lepidopteran 101. Lepidoptera is the large order that includes butterflies and moths. Thought to have evolved some 200 million years ago. And butterflies split from the moth lineage about 56 million years ago. But look at the bottom. This is why he made that quote about butterflies and moths. Everything's a moth, because 8 times as many moth species have been so far described. So a lot to come too. That 180,000, that's all our butterflies and moths worldwide. It will grow far higher than that, and it's because of the moths. So many haven't been discovered yet. But anyway, moths overwhelmingly are the Lepidoptera. They unfortunately have a reputational issue that butterflies do not face. Butterflies, you could fill a warehouse full of poetry about butterflies. It'd be something like this. None of it's not flattering, it's always flattering towards butterflies. People really like them. They are important. I'm not belittling butterflies. I got into them long before I did moths, but they do a lot of pollination services. That's our native azalea, one of them, the pinkster flower, Azalea paraclimenoides. But anyway, these swallowtail butterflies are the pollinators for these long stamened azaleas, and maybe the only ones. So they're doing lots of their work out there. That's good for plants. But one of the reasons we like them so much, I'm sure, is that they're, one, colorful, but they're diurnal. We can easily see them on our beautiful flowers during the day. This is a painted lady on white heath aster, the most common aster in our part of the world, but still serving important roles. This is moths. This is how moths have generally had it in the popular media, or in this case, a movie. Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins, very grim movie. And the totem of that was a moth called the Death's Head hawk moth. There's about 12 of these species. They're not native to North America, but that's what they used with the little skull in the back. You can kind of see how people might get a creepy vibe out of moths. This is the biggest moth that regularly reaches our region on its own power, called a black witch. It's a tropical species, and they're the size of bats, large bats. This is a really, really big thing. And it is creepy enough looking that even it's long had a Spanish name, Mariposa de la Muerte, the butterfly of death. And the legend is, if one flies into your casa and flies around to a couple corners of the room, someone will soon die in there, supposedly. And then closer to home, this is really close to you if you're in Pittsburgh, but Mothman. That was a mythical like Yeti moth that flew in the Ohio River Valley. Um, oh, back in the a long time ago, 80 some years ago, or the turn of the last century. And among other things, Mothman was attributed to the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which spanned West Virginia and Ohio, and a number of fatalities in that. That was in the 60s. This was all in the 60s and 50s or so. Uh, but that was why it fell, because of Mothman, who'd apparently been seen in that area. And then on the right side is Godzilla doing battle with Mothra, a horrifying giant moth this is from Japanese sci-fi. So they don't get the cuddly relationship with humans that butterflies do, but they're way more interesting, in my opinion. And a lot of them are exceptionally beautiful too. You just got to go out at night. This is one. This is oak tree near you. Dot line white. It's common, specialist of oaks, and a gorgeous, gorgeous little moth that looks like a little fuzzy teddy bear or something. The caterpillars are even crazier. I'm going to show you a lot of cool examples, but this is the caterpillar of what we just saw, the dot line white moth, and we're looking straight into its face. Let's go to the side so you can see this better. There it is. It's just plastered to a twig. It's a consummate twig mimic, or maybe by turns lichen mimic. There's a lot of lichen mimicry. There is a ton of botanical mimicry in caterpillars, crypsis. They want to blend in. And this is largely driven by birds. So here's some other examples. This is another oak, mostly oak specialist. It eats a few other things, but the white-dotted prominent moth. Look at its caterpillar. That's snake mimicry. There's a number of examples of snake mimicry in large caterpillars like this one. If a bird presses it too much, it'll first rear its head up like a cobra and sway it back and forth. And if it's pushed further, it'll throw itself into a coil and throw its head up over the coil. Those aren't eyes at all. Those are just the mandibles of the caterpillar drawn together in a way to look like eyes. This is all little bird defense. It might work on them. Here's one of our big silk moths. Silk moths tend to be the most popular, I've noticed, amongst people who are new to the moth world, just because they're big and spectacular looking in general, like this big tulip tree silk moth. And there's its caterpillar. Proportionally, big moth, big caterpillar. It usually goes that way, not always though. But anyway, this is noticeably bigger than your thumb. And it's in spice bush. Spice bush is a common host plant for it. But look at the back of it. We learned this as photographers a long time ago, to always look at all angles of your subject. This is the back end of that caterpillar, a little like smiling unicorn. Here's one that would be a plain Jane by most standards. It's pretty cool when you got it in your hand. It's a big sphinx moth, the pawpaw sphinx moth. And just like zebra swallowtails are specialists on pawpaw, so are a number of moth species, including this namesake pawpaw moth. But look at its caterpillar. It's like oh man, I don't know. It could win a larval beauty pageant prize. They almost look like they're glowing from within, like they've been lit from within. It's a big caterpillar, and it's got a blue terrier tail on the end. This is a walnut sphinx resting on the bark of a black walnut. They'll eat hickories as well as caterpillars. When I say they eat hickories, I always mean the caterpillar. The moths aren't eating hickories. Anyway, it's a gorgeous moth, with the pinkish hues and whatnot, but the cat is way weirder than that. And this is it. This is a large caterpillar, and it's a sound-making caterpillar. Caterpillars have little air holes basically along the side, and this one can force air out of those rather than take it in, and with such pace that it creates this audible, loud hissing whistle. And as a caterpillar does that, it violently flails around from side to side. And that's enough, like a chickadee would get out of there probably. It's a last ditch effort to mimic a snake essentially and avoid being eaten. This is the largest regularly occurring moth in Western PA and Ohio, the Cecropia moth. And they are the size of a bat as well. It's really, really spectacular. And if it's on your hand or a wall, you will not miss this thing. But they roost in leaf litter, like a lot of these big silk moths and other moths. There's even a whole group, a family of moths called the litter moths. Not because they like trash, it's because they like leaf litter. Leaf litter, I cannot even begin to tell you how important leaf litter is. They've been falling off trees for about 200 million years, and an incredible tapestry of white life is just sewn into leaf litter. You know, you get rid of the leaf litter, you get rid of all this stuff. There's a reason wood thrushes and other birds hunt in leaf litter because they find so much. So leave that wherever you can do it would be my advice. Here's the amazing caterpillar of the Cecropia moth, though, and it looks like it's right out of a Seuss movie. Now, I should also note if you see a caterpillar spines, you don't know it, best not to touch it because a lot of them are envenomating spines that will really hurt. This one doesn't. It's all shock and awe. I can't really stick those in there or do anything to you, but it probably looks intimidating to a bird. This one you couldn't even make up. So if we're out mothing, and by that I mean just, mercury vapor lights and black lights on white sheets, that's really attractive to moths at night. But if we're out doing that and one of these, a Harris's 3-spot, shows up on one of the sheets, everyone will come over to see it, even the hardcore people, because they aren't very common for reasons unknown. They're just so crazy looking. But the caterpillar is even crazier. So as you know, caterpillars grow through 5 molt stages in general, 5 molts, some 7 or 8, but 5's common, and that's what this one does. So that's how they get bigger. They come out as tiny little caterpillars of the egg, and then they molt eventually, and they come out much bigger, and on they go. So by the time you do 5 molts, you're this, I don't know, 2-inch long caterpillar that you couldn't miss if it's out like that. But it's a bird dropping mimic in part. That's why all the white gooiness and black is. That bird dropping mimicry is a thing in this world. So it's got that going. But what really stands out are the old head capsules on long setae or hairs over its head. So they shed those every time they molt too. Somehow they managed to retain about 3 of these stuck up here on hairs. And the reason for that are parasitoid insects, wasps and flies that land on them and try to lay their eggs on them. As soon as that caterpillar feels one of those, it whacks them with the old football helmets like flails and knocks them off. So that's another defense system. And then, you got this. So everything else I showed you in the right setting, at least, is very cryptic or camouflaged, hard to see. Then you have this pink yellow Teletubby thing. That's a really common moth. It's a maple specialist. Likes any of the native maples as a caterpillar. But you have to see it elsewhere to see why it might have evolved the pink and yellow bright colorations. So there it is on the samaras, or fruit of one of its major host plants, the red maple, in spring, when the maple fruit look just the same exact coloration and even pattern as the moth. So that could account for the color. So anyway, in the book, the region I showed you, the orange map area, we don't know how many moths are in it. Now, if it was a butterfly book, we could tell you exactly how many butterflies there were. But someone asked me that, I go, I don't know, 10,000. It's a guess. There could be way, way more than that, though. We just don't have near the feel for moths as we do butterflies. So butterflies, if we just took my home state again, and I did a butterfly for an Ohio book, it'd be 140 species. That's including everything, the rare vagrants that have ever showed up here, 140 species of butterflies. Your state might have a few more, but it wouldn't be a huge list either. Now, if we had someone like this in every Ohio county, our list would be way over 10,000, I suspect. Diane Brooks got interested in moths about 13 years ago, and it's just been fanatical chasing them around on her 12.5-acre property, southeast Ohio, not far from Pennsylvania. And so far, she's up to 1,000, almost 1,500 species of moths on that 12.5 acres. I said there was 140 species of butterflies in Ohio. So who knows? That's why it's a big figure, the moths, put it that way, way more than butterflies. So what do they all do? That's a $1 million question. What role do they serve out there? That's important. Well, one thing to note about insects is that They are what are called, biologists call R-selected species. We're K-selected species, like that little whitetail. We produce very, very few offspring, at least hopefully you do if you're, but insects, R-selected species, produce blizzards of offspring, thousands. That tells you one thing with absolute certainty. If you don't come back as an R-selected species, because the mortality rate is through the roof. That's why they have to produce so many offspring to survive the gauntlet. Here's kind of how it works. This was, I took this a few years ago, but that's a pair of salt marsh moths, female on the left. She had just dumped all those eggs. I think there's about 700 of them right there, believe it or not. She may dump more eggs. Certainly, female moths can easily lay over 1,000, many eggs, many species of them. So they're very, very prolific, or fecund is the word for it, when it comes to reproduction. So we'll just start at the beginning of how the cycle works. These are the eggs of a hickory horn devil. This is an enormous caterpillar. As you'll see, I used it because the eggs are bigger too. So the little dark eggs are little caterpillars formed, and just 10 minutes from eating their way out of those eggs. Here's one that's just out of the eggs, same thing, same group of insects here. And that one you probably wouldn't even recognize as a caterpillar with the naked eye. It's too small. It's like a couple millimeters. Yeah, it's hard to tell what it is. But they're just eating and growing machines, and they grow by molts. I jumped to a different species because it more clearly shows this, but this is a black wave flannel moth caterpillar. And it just molded out of the white fluff on the left. That's what it looked like before, and into the look that you have on the right. And that's its last or final mold, as big as it's going to get. And it's significantly bigger than that white fluff ball that it was before it did that. So they grow, incredible leaps each time they molt. So back to the hickory horn devil, the one where we started with the egg. And this is a third instar. So the stage between molts and a caterpillar is called an instar. So this has had 2 molts already. It's in its third instar, and you wouldn't miss it now. It's already a hefty caterpillar, but it tends to hide in plain sight, in this case on a black walnut leaf. Those are the old withered flowers of black walnut. They often just get caught on top of the leaves and eventually dry into a little curled thing, but there it is. And that's very, very similar to what that caterpillar looked like there. So it could be something like that going on. I don't know. Anyway, here's a penultimate instar, and you wouldn't miss it. I was moving in my car, saw it through the windshield, and found it that way. It's in a hickory tree, and it's got one more molt to go, though, obviously. And that's it. It's a beast. This was taken in situ where we found it in southern Ohio, and you could hear it crunching the walnut leaves, 5 feet away or more, just this crunching. That's how big the mandibles are. Just a jumbo of a caterpillar. It always causes inordinate excitement when anyone finds one of these. They're likened to a hot dog in size, which is hard to believe, a hot dog sized caterpillar. But there you go. He wasn't harmed in the making of the photo either. Truly is a hot dog sized caterpillar. Really, really impressive. And if all goes well for the horn devil, it becomes this, the regal moth, one of our larger silk moths, and an absolute gorgeous thing. It's basically, I got to say though, it's a flying gonad. It doesn't feed. The silk moth adults do not feed, so they only live a week or so, and their only purpose is to reproduce, find a mate and reproduce, and you're done basically. It was the caterpillar far, far, far longer than it would ever be that moth. So anyway, the growth between instars is truly staggering. Chelsea Gottfried, my co-author, got this amazing photo. And this is one a lot of you know. It's called a tobacco hornworm, although everyone calls them tomato hornworms, a native moth. Okay, anyway, somehow she got a second, this is caterpillar on top is already molded. It would have been a 2/3 smaller than that in that stage, but there's the second instar on top of a fully grown tobacco hornworm. And it just, very few animals on Earth, even like blue whales, probably increase as much in biomass as some of these caterpillars do. So anyway, I know a lot of you know the caterpillar I just used for that example because they eat your tomato plants. It's a long story, but it's really a tobacco hornworm. Tobacco is also in the nightshade family, like tomatoes are. But the moth is a native, and it eats our native members of the nightshade. And we put all these tomatoes out, and it took a shine to them, and now they can be a problem that way. Still a native, though. And they do important services in the wild. Here's what it becomes, the Carolina Sphinx. It goes by a different name than the tobacco hornworm caterpillar. But this is a non-native 4 o'clock, but it hovers like a hummingbird and has a super long proboscis to get way into flowers. And that's a good niche for pollinators, some pollinators. So anyway, this is one of the rarest orchids in the United States. It's federally threatened. It's called the prairie white fringed orchid, and it is well known that sphinx moths, like I just showed you, are primary pollinators for many of the orchids, especially this genus, Phytanthera. If you look closely at the base of the flowers, you'll see a long greenish white tube going off all of them. That's the nectar, or the nectar spur. And the nectar reward is way down in the tip of that. So you got to have some incredible tongue to get into these, and sphinx moths too. But I wanted to see which sphinx moth. So I got permission to sit on this very plant, and about 15 around it into the nightfall one night. And figuring the moths would come active around dusk or right after dark. And sure enough, that's what happened. And what was the sphinx moth? The good old Carolina Sphinx, tobacco or tomato hornworm as a juvenile form, pollinating one of the rarest plants in North America. So it's sacrifice some of your tomatoes to some of them. That would be my advice. Look at the length of the tongue, the proboscis, to get all the way into that super deep nectar spur. That excludes just about all pollinators right there, which is what the orchid's trying to do. It wants a highly, highly mobile pollinator that can take the spawn somewhere far away. Anyway, here's a really cool example that happened this last fall. This is a cranefly orchid. They bloom in midsummer in our part of the world in woods. Most people notice them by the leaves on the right, especially with the purple underleaf. They're evergreen. By the time the flowering spike comes up, those leaves are long withered away, and there are no leaves apparent to the plant. But this is another one that's really got an interesting moth pollination system by only a very, very small group of inchworm moths. And we got to see this. So there's a zebra concholotes, one of the most striking moths. And one of the persons there that night ran up to me with her camera and showed me this. And as soon as I saw that, I really, really got interested. So look at the head of the moth. We're going to zoom in on it. That is pollinia, pollen sacs of cranefly orchid, the orchid that I just showed you. Stuck on it, they are on a long white sticky pedestal that's stuck right to the eye of the moth. These moths have fuzzy eyeballs, if you will. So what happens when one of these concholotes moths or a few other species come into that orchid, they're attracted by the aroma that it puts off right around dusk. And then as they find the nectar reward, they have to stuff their face right into the flowers where the eyeballs come in contact with the sticky pollinia. And when it pulls away, it yanks the pollen out of the plant like you see there. And it will be ruptured on another flower and ideally pollinated. So moths are doing a lot of work with pollination in different ways. So high orchids, and this is true throughout much of the Midwest, the ratio probably, we have 47 species of orchids, and the majority are moth pollinated. So most of them are probably selected for just a very small suite of moths. So anyway, the upshot is moths are really important to orchids. If you like orchids, like that purple fringeless orchid, spectacular thing. Green woodland orchid, totally moth pollinated here. Butterflies will actually pollinate this as well, but you can see there's long white nectar spurs on this tiny green woodland orchid, and that's a surefire sign moths are pollinating it. So anyway, the caterpillar stage, one of the 4 parts of a perfect metamorphosis or 4-part life cycle, and that'd be the egg, the caterpillar, the adult moth, and then the pupae, the pupal stage, a cocoon that it's often in the moth world. So anyway, these caterpillars, though, you don't want to come back as one because your mortality rate's apt to be about 99%. Hence all those eggs I showed you. The predatorial gauntlet is extreme for a caterpillar. This is a beetle, the caterpillar hunter, that is nocturnal. Most caterpillars become active after dark. This just runs around the trees, finding them and chewing them up. This is a tachinid fly. I talked about the caterpillar that bats insect pests that are trying to lay eggs off of it. This would be one of those flies that it would bat away. This is a tachinid moth, and tachinid moths are parasitoids, not parasites, parasitoids. They kill their hosts. So the evolution of all that long hair or setae on this salt marsh caterpillar in the backdrop, that may well have happened to try and thwart these insects like this. And there's a big group of wasps that do it too, from laying eggs on their skin because it's just simply hard. That fly is sitting there waiting for it to expose its underbelly because the underbelly is not thickly furred like that or haired like that. So she will probably get an egg in there eventually, and then it's a walking dead caterpillar. So that happens. Here's a little Eulophus wasp. This is just like, we're talking in measurements in the millimeters. It looks like a little gnat from any distance, but she's laying eggs, actually injecting them probably into this caterpillar. So it's doomed. And on it goes. You see so much. There's the same wasp species, the pupa, that have eaten all the important stuff inside the caterpillar, and they've left just a withered husk, and all the caterpillar won't make it at that stage, and they popped out, and the adult wasps will soon come out of those pupae. Started anew. Here's a more active predator. This is a big thread-waisted wasp, actually stunning insect, but she is lugging a freshly paralyzed saddled prominent. She doesn't kill it. She just lays down a punishing chemical that just almost instantly paralyzes the victim. So it's still alive, and she's dragging it over to a crypt, a pre-made burrow in the ground, where she'll put it in there and lay an egg or two in there, seal it off with a wall, get out of there first, of course, and then junior wasps, when they hatch, as grubs, they'll have fresh meat, preserved caterpillar that's not even dead. Spiders get in on the moth action. This is the coolest of all, in my opinion. This looks like a big fresh bird dropping on a redbud leaf, and it is another bird dropping mimicry thing. We know better, though. We go around to the other side, and it's this toad-like bullous spider. This is a pretty good-sized spider, and utterly bizarre. And so is their life cycle and how they catch things. So the magic happens after night. This is the same spider, came back after dark, and it's got the fishing line set out. The end of that is like a drop of Elmer's glue. It's a viscous, liquidy almost thing. But anyway, the female spider, this is a female, of course, is emitting pseudo pheromones from her body now, and they mimic a small group of moths. So the males of those species, which are very common, are drawn to that. They think it's a female moth perhaps over there. So they flutter ever closer to the spider and get close enough. She, quick as a wink, whips that line out and sticks them on the glue drop and reels them in and eats them. So it's fully dependent on moths for its to have that. Bats and moths are the relationship here is basically we wouldn't have bats were it not for moths. It's their major food source. Beetles would be number two. There's a dozen or so species of bats in this part of the world, and they all depend heavily on moths, like this little migratory red bat in spring migration, roosting in beech trees, hunting moths at night. A lot of moths have a big problem with bats. Bats are big moth predators, as they should be. But, the problem is, so say you're this Luna, this is a male Luna moth with those huge ferns bolted to his head. Those are the antennae are packed with receptors that can pick up the pheromones, airborne pheromones of a female, maybe a mile away. It's really incredible, the sensitivity of these. Then the male here flies to her. That's how he finds her. He finds her and mates with her, and that's pretty much it for them. But his rub is he's got to go up into the air column to get to her, maybe a long distance. And that's where the bats are with their sonar systems, picking up moths flying through the air. So when you see the tails on a Luna moth like that, you might, oh, they're there for camouflage. They break its appearance up. And there's a lot of truth to that. And that's what everyone thought. And it probably does play a role, but that's not the main reason for Luna moth tails. It's very, very common to see big silk moths, lunas, especially like this. That's all fresh bat damage. The V in the wing, he's got the tails off. Everything else is perfect. This is a female moth too, by the way. So what happens, the bat locks his radar or sonar on a moving moth and pinging sound waves off of it, bouncing back to the receptors in the bat's ear that are very sensitive, and it tells it right where the subject is. And it does with this Luna moth too. The problem is the tails that wiggle madly in flight, waggling around like flags. That's what attracts the sonar. So they just go right to the tail, and you end up with this. But the French fry in the middle got away, and it could still reproduce itself. So the tails are bat defenses. Then there's a small group of tiger moths, not this particular species, but we don't even know which ones all do this, but at least a couple are known, where these tiger moths, when they hear bats coming at night and they're flying, they're capable of producing their own salvo of pseudo echolocation. So when the bat gets close enough, they release this barrage of clicks of their own. It jams the true sonar on the bat and sends them flying right by you. That's been shown in laboratories. We don't even know. I mean, there's probably a lot more stuff than this going on. That's just what we know a little about. Anyway, so when you look at a picture like this is Shawnee State Forest in Southern Ohio. That's 70,000 acres of contiguous forest, the biggest one left in Ohio. And what would strike all eyes just about looking out on this forest is leaves. I mean, that's the trees are the dominant biomass, and it's just nothing but leaves, leaves and leaves, incalculable amount. But not many critters, not many animals eat leaves. Caterpillars are this frontline army of epic proportions that are busily converting all that leaf biomass, or lots of it, into a form of protein that can be captured and digested by animals, most notably birds. No moss, we wouldn't have that process going on. We'd lose a lot of those birds. But anyway, if you are one of those caterpillars in a tree eating a leaf, this would be Freddy Krueger basically looking at you. It's a red-eyed vireo. We've all heard of vireos, and there are other vireos, but most of them are caterpillar specialists. Definitely in this case. And that's why he's cocking his head like that. He's looking up at the underside of a leaf during the day because more caterpillars hide on the underside. Anyway, just to take the one red-eyed vireo, it's the most common breeding bird in eastern deciduous forest, at least a migratory one. And here in Ohio, we have about 1 million red-eyed vireos that come here from South America seasonally to exploit our caterpillar crop. And they certainly eat a lot of them. So very, very conservatively, all those red-eyed vireos in Ohio on a long, late summer day are eating 30,000 caterpillars. But that's very, very conservative. But that's just one bird. It just puts into scale how many caterpillars you have to fuel major populations like this. Later, in June, oftentimes the cuckoos show up, yellow-billed and black-billed. This is a yellow-billed, but they're primary caterpillar hunters. They even hunt at night a lot just because their caterpillar of prey are active then, but they don't come back until really late spring or early summer because this is a big bird and they're waiting for the caterpillar crop to enlarge in size. They don't want dinky little inchworms. They're warblers. You wouldn't, everyone loves warblers, and we just wouldn't have them were it not for moth caterpillars. This is a worm-eating warbler that really should be named a caterpillar-eating warbler. It would never eat a worm. There's a Nashville warbler in migration from Central America to the Canadian boreal forest. in Ohio opening up a grape leaf cluster because it knows there's a caterpillar hiding in there. Grapes are really important to lots of native moths. And there's a northern parula, smallest warbler in eastern North America, with a little tiny inchworm in its bill. And it's in Shawnee State Forest in mid-April. It had just arrived from more tropical wintering grounds. And its arrival was a perfect synchronicity with the big early spring hatch of inchworms. And there's a cerulean warbler with an ashen pinion caterpillar. And that's a good meal for a bird that size, but the caterpillar is going to a good cause. We've lost 80% of the population of cerulean warblers in the last 50 years. It's a victim of how we manage our forests primarily. I'll leave it at that for now, but they are primary caterpillar eaters as well. Even the vegans get in on it. This is a song sparrow, and most sparrows are good vegans. They primarily do eat vegetable matter. But when song sparrows have 5 nestlings in a nest about 15 feet away from where I took this, they need protein more than vegetable matter can provide. And so they switch to caterpillars. He's got 2 or 3 prominent caterpillar in his bill or her bill to go to the young nearby. What all ratchets up to scale, though, all these good food webs do, and everything I just showed you that's so cute would be killed and eaten by a Cooper's hawk. But you could really also just make the case that Cooper's hawks came from plants, leaves on trees, and other plants that are eaten by caterpillars that allowed those songbirds to grow up to be eaten by these. So really, it all goes back to native plants. You just cannot escape that fact, at least in this part of the world. So botanical mimicry, that's an interesting little part of both moths and caterpillars, but this is all driven by birds, I would suspect. This is evolution, between predator and prey, with the defenseless, mostly prey, just trying to not be seen at all. They become one with the plants. This looks from any distance like a little gall on a leaf, and I think that's probably the intent, because a lot of galls do look like that, little raised bumps that are often colorful, but it's this red cross button slug when we look close. Just a tiny little turtle-like caterpillar that glides across the leaves, that hides out in plain sight, looking like a leaf gall, apparently. This is epic fall coloration. So the biggest time of year for caterpillar biomass and probably species diversity is early fall, late spring. So by at least mid-September, necrotic tissue is forming on the leaves as they die and fade away. And a lot of the caterpillars, like this blinded sphinx, they're active that time of year. They take on the same sort of color scheme. This is an elm sphinx that's mostly a specialist on elm, and it's evolved the look of the leaf. When its veins, lateral veins on the caterpillar mirror the angled veins on an elm leaf. That's how they blend in there, trying to avoid birds. Few do it as well as this. This is a common one. It eats a lot of plants, mostly woody plants. So, but checker French prominent caterpillars literally become one with the leaf. Their bodies are dappled green and brown like a dying leaf, and they eat in from the edge, and they just become that leaf. And here's another example, the unicorn caterpillar that does the same thing. And then maybe no one does it better than that. That's an elm specialist, a double-toothed prominent caterpillar, and its back just mirrors the serrated edges of the elm leaves, both American and slippery elm. The moths don't do shabby at all either. So this is why you don't see a lot during the day, because they look like this gray patch prominent, just a little broken off wooden nubbin on a twig that no one would ever pay attention to. That's even better, a white blotch heterocampa that even has these wet, greenish, licheny algae type areas on its back and really can mirror the twig quite well. So pollinators, that's what the whole gist of the book is. We want people to learn about their pollinating roles and put those plants in the garden. So we have 150 species of cool natives in the book, drawn in part for nectar ability for moths, but also aesthetics and things like that too. Anyway, if you go out at night with a flashlight in the summer and just shine your light on the same plants that attract a lot of butterflies, you'll see probably even way more moths. This is a common milkweed with the spotted grass moth. Taken at night, a lot of these were taken at night. Beautiful bold feathered grass moth also on common milkweed. Milkweeds are really, really attractive to a lot of moths. Button bush, white flowers are really good. The evolution of white flowers, that could be related to moss. I don't know, but they're, in whatever reason, they're very attracted to white flowers. Like this is the head of a button bush, a native wetland shrub that does really well in just garden soils. Very ornamental. This was taken in a planted garden. It's a native plant called Culver's root that likes wet meadows, wet damp meadows, but it was thriving in this garden, and these zebra concholotes moths were all over it. Very, very attracted to it. And if you have asters, anything in the aster family almost, at least the true asters, that's what the caterpillar, that beautiful moth eats. So you can grow them yourself and then put these Culver's roots in and get scenes like this. Mints in general are really good, like just good old bergamot, wild bergamot. I love this thing, maybe because it's easy to grow, but so much uses it at different times of the year. But moths are big visitors at night, like this variegated cutworm moth. And there's a dingy cutworm on one of our native thistles. Very few people are either able to find the native thistles or bold enough to grow them, but man, oh man, they're so good for moths and butterflies. But anyway, another cutworm. Cutworm has a bad connotation. Army worms as well, they're closely related, and some of these species are considered pests in lawns. You know, these big caterpillars can eat the soil or sod. I mean, and I'm like, more power to them. I hope they can eat it all, you know, turf grass. But that's why people don't like them. But I have to note that bluebirds absolutely love cutworm and armyworm moths, even the ones that eat people's yards, which are native. The moths are native. The sod, of course, the sod is not native, of course. Anyway, we've all seen how bluebirds sit up on fence posts. They act like little thrush raptors or prominent perches, a wire, and they watch the ground really intently. They're looking for those cutworm caterpillars, and then they'll dive down like a hawk and grab it when they spot one. So the bluebirds, you know, we all know they eat a lot of fruit because we see it in winter more easily, but during the warmer seasons, caterpillars of moths, Lepidoptera larvae, that's what dominates their diet. So moths even are really important to a bluebird that you might not think of. And there's proof in the pudding. This was an old punky fence post out in the middle of nowhere, and they were using it as a nest site, and he's bringing in a moth caterpillar. We also profile 150 both moth species and plant species. And these plant species, again, I'm not naive to gardeners, just traditional gardeners, because I've spoken to those groups many times, and aesthetics really drive a lot of that train. And yeah, I can see that, you know, you want to look at something pretty in your garden all the time, but there's so many natives that are just as good as anything you could get anywhere. This is one of them, Turk's cap lily, giant lily that can get, I don't know, over head height and have big candelabras of flowers. And there's some really cool moths, caterpillars that feed on those. Sedges are really underutilized. This is one of the prettiest sedges, and it's one of the few ones in the book because they have that beautiful green and chocolate coloration. But sedges collectively, they support a lot of lepidopteran larvae. This would be moths primarily. And plus, they're just underutilized as landscape plants. They can really form striking patchwork patterns and good ground cover under tree bases, that sort of thing. Swamp rose mallow. That's as good looking a mallow as there is. This is our native one with a number of specialist moths that only use it, and a lot of other moths. Penstemons are really good. They're very valuable for both nectar sources for insects and also caterpillar source for a select few group of moths. But this one is easy to grow in really dry, barren areas that might not be that easy to plant for, but will really the pollinators. You can't go wrong with phlox. We have a number of species in the book because they're great ornamentals. Whether they're native or not, they act as ornamentals. They're good ground cover. And if you ever see this particular one for sale, snap it up. It's the prettiest of all these eastern phloxes, in my opinion. And they'll form like little ground covers, smooth phlox. Asters are a really good choice. We have 47 species just in that group in Ohio. You've got probably even more over there. So there are a lot of options, and a lot of them have come into the trade. This is one of the prettiest of all, and it's very easy to grow, the smooth aster, and it's in the trade commonly. There's a nice ground cover that's native. Dwarf crested iris. I think people should play more with that instead of these Siberian or Eurasian plants that we use all too commonly. There's some cool moss associated with that too. Maples cannot be beat. This is, I don't know why anyone would have one of those Norway maple, non-native king crimson things, when you could have this. This is the native sugar maple, and maples are, as a group, second only to the oaks in the number of caterpillar species that feed on them. So they're highly, highly productive in the moth world. So a simple recipe to grow very cool moths. We have tons of that in the book, but this is kind of how it works. This is a moth that everyone likes to see because they're diurnal and they look like little tiny hummingbirds. Snowberry clearwing. And here it is on wild bergamot, the mint that I said was so good for pollinators. And here's the other species, the hummingbird clearwing moth. We have two common ones in our region. And this is on tall larkspur. And if you ever see tall larkspur for sale, snap it up. It would be very rare in PA, I'm sure, as a native. It's pretty rare over here even, and more common west of us. But it's this giant head high or more larkspur that's festooned with just dozens of flowers. When I was taking this shot, which was in the wild in a prairie, there were like 3 or 5 of these hummingbird clearwing moths flying around the larkspur plants. But to have the hummingbird clearwing moths, you have to have the host plant, the plant the caterpillar eats. And those are honeysuckles, the Caprifoliaceae, the honeysuckle family. And of course, some of our worst invasives are in that group, and we sure don't want to do that. But here's a hummingbird clearwing eating a member of the honeysuckle family. And here's a snowberry clearwing caterpillar eating the same. And this is no, never mind. That's on a different species of viburnum. My bad. Anyway, here's one of the greatest plants to have if you want to grow those hummingbird moths, both species. They both eat this one. Viburnums. Viburnums are in the honeysuckle family, and this is a really easy one to grow. It's really, really pleasing to the eye, and you can grow both of the caterpillars off of that. You can also plant this. This would be native probably to southern PA, but it doesn't get any farther north than that probably. But we like it. It doesn't run amok here either. I've never seen that happen around here, but I've heard it can go a little feral occasionally. But anyway, it hosts both of those same clearwing moth caterpillars, the hummingbird moth caterpillars, and blooms all summer. Great plant visually. And then the real hummingbirds love it as well. And they come in. So you can get all 3 things right here on your same plant, probably in the same day if you're lucky. So gardening with native flora, you can read these take-home points yourself, but I like the middle one best. Creates a footprint that far transcends the yard. So instead of the yard serving as a sink, which they often do, we can create at least a mini source that we're sending more things out and try and create some more connectivity because we've eliminated so much of that out there. And that's what our idea is, to try and get more traditional gardeners to come to the world of native plants through moths, hence the book. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for presenting, Jim. Tamara, did you want to take questions or do you want me to go ahead and carry on with that? We'll move to questions then. So I'll start with those that are in the chat. From Ed Wren, we have, do the caterpillars tend to feed nocturnally too?
Yeah, Ted, Ted, I'm sure put that in before I answered that, but yes, definitely they feed nocturnally as well. And I've spent myriad hours out at night, finding caterpillars for photo subjects, and that's why we go out at night. You find infinitesimally more of them if you go out under cover of darkness as opposed to the day. They hide really, really well during the day. Even the birds really have to work at it.
Right. And then our next question is from Brent that is, many moths have a lot of texture in their wings, example, zeal moths. Any science to explain this to disrupt bat sonar?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one that now I'm not a bat expert or anything, or even a moth expert. Lepidoptery is not my background. We learned a lot through the book, but um, I think there's. Oh, I'm not trying to dodge the question either, but I think there's still a lot to be learned there. There is no doubt that some of the scales, it's colored scales or refractive scales that create that illusion of fur, on a moth or whatever, or on the wings, but a lot of them it is acoustic camouflage, apparently. I think it's even been shown to be a fact in at least a few species, but yeah, so definitely there's an acoustic camouflaging or muffling effect to probably, bats sonar emissions. Then all the colors, a lot of that's going to be camouflage. But yeah, the really interesting stuff is going to be as we learn more about acoustic camouflage through the scales on the insects.
Awesome. The last question that's in the chat right now from Melissa. What is your opinion of cultivars or more specifically nativars?
I'm not a fan, just to be frank about it. I never was. And I, I I think that reflects more on us in a certain way as a species where I don't know if we think we're always making it better, although there's certainly people that do this that do believe that, but we just can't leave well enough alone. No, I wouldn't put any cultivar. And then, the cultivars or nativars, whatever you want to call them, like nine bark, if you know that shrub, nine bark would be a great example of this. Sometimes you can't find a pure version of that. They all have purple leaves. They're selecting for anthocyanins in the leaf tissue because it makes the leaves purple. And apparently people really like purple plants for reasons unknown to me. But what the problem with that is that probably really affects their viability to the caterpillar world, because anthocyanins and some of those compounds are there to kind of thwart herbivory. They're not tasty or other factors. And that's probably when you create a purple nine bark or any other tree, it's taking away a heck of a lot of the value to the native Lepidoptera. I see no reason to do it. So no, I'm not a fan.
All right, and then one more question in the chat here. In your book, do you include the plant species and the host relationships for the caterpillars or moths?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because I always forget to say this, but in the book, yes, there is a big list of moths that are attracted to that plant. And those are just the host moths. The ones that actually need the plant is for part of their life cycle. So yes, you will find an abundance of information. It was really time consuming to run that stuff down too. The literature isn't as easy to work with moss, but yeah, you'll find scores of that sort of thing.
All right, there's another question, and there's a couple questions in the chat here.
Okay.
From Brent, any local success stories of moth populations recovering in response to native plants being reintroduced or plantings expanded? How quickly can moths repopulate in an area after plants are reintroduced?
That's great, really good. I'm not sure I've ever been asked that before, but I'm drawing a blank just off the top of my head of a moth that really came back from the brink, because we managed for it with plants. I cannot think of an example. I'm sorry. And that may be because I just don't know of one. They don't get to study that butterflies do. And then I think basically your second part was their response time to new opportunities. it's incredibly fast. Winged creatures, even moths, are covering so much ground collectively, it's ridiculous because most of them are finding their mates via airborne cues, and they have to fly to them. Some moths are migratory. Migration is a thing, you know, sometimes very long migrations even. So yes, there are moths just getting around constantly, and it will not be too long unless you planted something really rare for some really rare moth, you know, then there's so few, maybe they won't find you. But all the common stuff, yeah, they'll find you like the next day, it seems like.
And then I think there's just a comment in the chat that the Karen has viburnum leaf beetle larva stripping her airwood viburnums to bare twigs each summer. Time will tell if shrubs survive. I use no pesticides, just accept that I'm probably feeding the birds.
Yeah, good point. I saw that question in there and I wanted to address it. I have a arrowwood viburnum right outside my front door here, and it's just starting to get hit by that. So I'm kind of like you, wait and see if it kills it. I've heard they certainly do and can. I think it can be a nasty thing. I don't know of good treatments for it. Sorry, just don't know them, but I'm sure they're out there online. So yeah, that can be a nasty.
And if anyone else wants to unmute and ask any questions. I see Melissa's asked you what your favorite moth is.
Oh, let's see. There's what 10,000 to choose from that I know of. Yeah, that's a tough one. But I would say, yeah, I'll give you one. I have one. Sooty winged chowsela. All right. Sooty winged chowsela. It's a stunning moth. It's like part of its chrome and the rest of it's orange. It's bizarre, but it is a parasitoid of paper wasps, the Polistes genus, those little wasps that make the little gray nest on a pedestal under your eaves and flares out like a mushroom, and they really pack a punch when they sting you. Those wasps, in part, feed on caterpillars. They're sort of predatorial things. Most of those would be moth caterpillars. Karmic revenge. The moth has evolved to be a parasitoid of those very wasps. So she lays her eggs somewhere near the base of that wasp nest. When the little caterpillars hatch, they go right up the pedestal and into the cells of the wasp and eat the wasp grubs. The caterpillars eat the wasp grubs. So this is just fabulous, karmic revenge out there. That'd be my favorite one.
How much of a problem is pesticides for moths at various stages?
Great question, Ed. Horrible problem. I mean, certain things like now, I'm not sure how they do it now, but like remember gypsy moth spraying. I think there was a point early on when they were using non-selective herbicides, and they would kill all the lepidopteran. That's one of the big factors attributed in the seemingly big loss of giant silk moths in the Northeast is all that gypsy moth spraying that was killing all the native moths. So it depends, you know, it depends on what the chemical is and how it's being used. I'm sure there's some spraying that occurs of non-native grasses and whatnot that's really specific that might not really do much, but if it's a non-specific herbicide, moth killer, it's going to be very bad, and we already know that from experience.
Not herbicides.
Or oh, I'm sorry. What you said? Did you say herbicide?
No, you said herbicides.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's been a long day.
That's all right. They kill
no,
plants anyway, so.
Yeah. So no, it's basically the toxins used to kill insects that kill a lot of like insects, collateral damage, you could call it. That's where that stuff gets problematic.
Karen made a comment about light zappers.
Well, yeah, they're non-selective too. I don't know again why people feel the need to have those, but I don't know how many moths they get though. I've never really been around one. So no one uses them around here.
Are you familiar with Dark Skies International?
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that there's a few questions in the chat as well.
Okay, far away, or maybe I can pull them up.
Yeah, Brent had asked, any tips on finding the moth that eats aphids?
Yeah.
Is that in the chat?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'm going through these. Oh, here it is. Any tips on finding the moth that eats aphids? No, I don't know anything about that. So no, I have no tips. I'm very sorry.
And then we talked about the mosquito blue lights. And then I see that Karen asked, do most moths overwinter as cats?
Great last question. I now I see that question about the zapper, and they note, I guess this is Karen. Years ago, we had one until I saw all the dead moths. Well, our question's answered. So no, they're definitely not good. Do most moths overwinter as cats? I would say, just in our part of the world, probably yes. Probably yes. But a lot of them also survive as pupae in their cocoons, often in the leaf litter, and then others as eggs. So, but probably most of them, probably I would say caterpillars, yes.
We should call it leaf beds instead of leaf litter.
You're right. That's a really good idea. Just that connotation of litter.
Well, it's 8:08, so I'll make one last call for any questions. And if nobody wants to unmute and ask a question, then we will log off for the evening.
Well, thank you very much, Tamara. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me.
All right, thank you everyone so much. And if you are not a member of Wild Ones, please consider joining today and certainly check out Jim's book as well. Thank you all and have a great night.
Bye-bye.
And thanks again to you, Jim.
Oh, glad to do it. Thank you.